Welcome to the Observeday podcast, the show where we celebrate the days that matter. From holidays to meaningful observances, we bring you inspiring conversations, stories, and ideas to make each day count. Whether it's raising awareness, learning something new, or simply sparking joy, this is your space to explore the calendar in a whole new way. I'm your host, Wisdom Okonkwo, and I'm excited to share today's observance with you. Let's dive in. Today on Observe Day, as we celebrate National Reading New Book Month, I'm joined by someone who proves that books and stories should be for everyone. Maxwell Ivey, better known as the Blind Blogger, is a serial online entrepreneur, accessibility consultant, award-winning author, podcaster, and speaker. Despite losing his sight, Max has built businesses, written 4 books, and traveled solo across the country. His mission is to make accessibility and inclusion part of everyday life, not through compliance or guilt, but through communication, collaboration, and showing what's possible. Today we'll talk about how reading can change lives, why accessibility in books and content matters more than ever, and what it means to never let excuses hold you back. Welcome to the podcast, Maxwell.
Well, thank you, Wisdom. I appreciate you having me as a guest again.
Yeah. Since this is National Reading New Book Month, what role have books played in your life, especially as someone who is blind?
Well, when I was younger, say 5 or 6 years old, I still had good enough vision to read a regular textbook. And one of the things I looked forward to was going to the library or to the school library at the end of the week and browsing through the shelves and picking out a new book. I
Yeah.
also looked forward to the book fairs that they used to have in the schools where they would send you a catalog of books that you could buy during that week. And generally, you could either get them for a discounted price or you'd get something special. Like we bought a Winnie the Pooh book one year that came with a Winnie the Pooh calendar. So you used to look forward to those as well. And as my vision started to decrease as I got older, I was only able to read large print, and then I had to use a TV monitor to blow up the print, and then eventually I had to switch to audio and to braille. And
Yeah.
in the beginning, I was frustrated by my lack of choices when it came to what books I could get on. And of course, I don't know about Nigeria, but back then in the United States, we had the Library of, let's see, what did they call it? We had the Library for the Blind. It's since
Oh, okay.
become part of the National Library Services for blind and dyslexics. But back in the early days, they sent the books out on albums. You would play a 33 and a third record on both sides, and you'd play 5 or 6 or 10 of them to listen to an entire book. It wasn't fun if you lived in a mobile home or a trailer because any vibration would make the needle skip, and you'd have to
Yeah.
move it back. Then later cassettes came, and now we have the digital audio where we can go online through an app and search the collection and download. But the thing that really helped me a lot with my frustration about not being able to because there's something special about going into a bookstore or a library and browsing. Just
Yeah.
just keeping
Yeah.
yourself wide open, waiting to see
To
what
the
jumps out at you.
possibilities.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and so that wasn't possible for a while. But then I found out that the library services had an 800 number, and they had very well trained library research assistants. And
Yeah.
all I had to do was call that number and tell them an idea of what I wanted to read. And they would go through the catalog and start finding me books that would fit in with what I wanted. So that helped a lot. But, even nowadays, um, the government based library services, even though most of them collaborate now, there's still a lot of audiobooks that aren't available unless you're going to pay for them through Amazon or Audible.
Yeah.
There's a lot of print books that haven't been recorded in audio yet. There's a lot of print books that have been recorded in audio, but the person who recorded it is not willing to share the audio.
Yeah.
They want to be paid for the audio,
Yes.
and I don't blame them for that. I don't have a problem with that. But there's you know there's a huge amount of books and magazines, and now even music and um, performance scripts available in audio or available in braille because of the advancement of digital braille. So that instead of printing a big bulky braille book, they translate the text into a braille ASCII or braille computer code, and you download that braille code, and then you connect it with a digital braille tablet, and it uses a series of magnets and metal pins that raise and lower as you read through the text. So
Yeah.
a lot of stuff is available in Braille, but there is still so much out there that is not really readily available to the majority of people with vision loss or with disabilities. That's one thing about specialized resources for the blind and visually impaired is there are millions of people who are aging who are losing their vision who could benefit from those services, but
Yeah.
they don't want to say that they're disabled to the point that they need those services, so they're missing out on that. But
Yeah.
I really feel like the storytelling from the books I read, from things like Charlotte's Web and Wizard of Oz when I was real young, to some of the James Bond and Sherlock Holmes when I was a teenager, to more recently books like J.D. Robb's Eve Dallas in Death series, or you know, uh, Clive Cussler's Oregon Files series, or even some of the new James Bond. I don't mind. So it's been with me, and I use books often to help me get past things like if I got to do something in my work that I don't really enjoy doing, I'll probably read a little bit of a good book before I start or after I've done enough to where I can say, okay, you've done enough, you can take little breaks. I also really enjoy using the audio books when I'm riding my stationary bike or doing other repetitive activities because your brain is open when you're doing repetitive activities. So why not
Yeah.
listen? And I like to split my reading up. I'll probably read as much fiction as I will biographies and personal development because you just never. Somebody once asked me about that. I said, well, some days some days you need a salad, but some days you want a Snickers bar.
Yeah. 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 Well,
So
I think you've one of the when we had the chat the last time, it was really really inspiring. And the funny thing is that I even went all ahead and shared some of your story with my other guests. And in the course of conversation, I was like, yeah, I did interview a podcaster, and now I'll talk about your story. And what that does is that it reframes things and put things into perspective. And so you've written award-winning books yourself. How did you approach writing and publishing in a way that made your work more accessible to others?
right. Well, I'm going to talk about the accessibility part first.
Okay.
I have tried to submit my books to the library services that are out there and get them to record them so they're available to more people. However, none of the libraries have seen fit to believe that my stories are valuable enough to be recorded.
Hmm.
Even the one book that I paid to have recorded has been rejected anytime I've tried to submit it to a national library for the blind. But however, I have there's a site called Bookshare, which is a place where people can share books through the disability community in the text or the PDF version of the book. So I have put my books there to try to get them to as many people as possible. And then as far as the writing and publishing part, that's the real hard part because, I've written 4 books and I've been saying I've written 4 books for probably 3 years now because the process for somebody who's visually impaired to go from the manuscript to the edited, formatted, uh, final document that you can submit to Amazon or the other online publishing sites, there's a lot of work in there that needs somebody who can see it.
Yeah.
So for me, I've hired an editor. I've been real lucky with my editor Lorraine regularly from wordingwell.com, and she's helped me with everything from the editing to the formatting to the cover art to even registering the stupid ISBN numbers. I mean,
Yeah.
uh, that even something as simple as that is harder than it ought to be if you are doing things with a screen reader or a screen magnifier or some other adaptive technologies. I generally sit down and write. I open up just a basic text document on my computer and I start writing and I am blessed because I've done quite a few creative things over the years, building
Yeah.
my own websites, starting my own podcast, writing the books. Um, I'm blessed with this ability to get to good enough is good enough. And so what I do is I will put everything I have down on the electronic page, and I will then trust my editor, whether that's my book editor Lorraine or my the editor at the magazines
Yeah.
and websites I write for. I will trust them to find the best stuff, to reorganize it, to make it better without taking the part that makes it Max's out of it.
Yeah.
And I actually got that advice from a photographer. Guy was one of my first guests on What's Your Excuse. Um, Michael Schwartz, a former award-winning photojournalist, traveled the world with his cameras. Started losing his sight, but as he says, he's losing his sight, but not his storyteller's vision. And I asked him, I said, how does somebody who's blind take pictures or take film and, make a movie? He said two things. He said, one, get as wide a lens as you possibly can. And two, take as much film as possible because you can always edit stuff out and you can always edit stuff down, but you can't put stuff in or edit stuff bigger.
Yeah.
And that really worked for me with the photos I took on my first trip to New York that ended up in my third book, where there's like 60 photos, and people look at the photos, and some people still ask me, um, "Would you tell me who the photographer was who followed you around?"
Yeah.
And I have to tell them there wasn't no photographer. I had this really
Yeah.
simple DSLR camera, and I would just hand it to whoever happened to be around and ask them to take pictures. And of course, everybody took more pictures than they needed to. So I came home with like 300 pictures,
Yeah.
and Lorraine whittled it down to 60. But, those pictures in that book, they also tell a story. As far as being you know, learning the craft of storytelling from other people's writings, I also have to credit the fact that I grew up in a family of carnival owners. And in the carnival and amusement industry, especially the traveling part of it, there's a long tradition of storytelling. We tell stories as cautionary tales. We tell stories to educate the young people. We tell stories to entertain ourselves while we're sitting there not making no money.
Yeah.
And of course, I think I may have told you this. I have had a hard time seeing my storytelling as good as my dad's storytelling because when I tell stories, it's for entertainment, inspiration, or motivation. As far as trying to make money from my
Yeah.
writing, I I don't have to. I don't live or die with whether or not somebody buys one of my books. But when my dad was telling stories, he was telling them to festival organizers, creditors, law enforcement officers. His stories had to be good, or we might not eat that week. So
That's a lot of pressure.
yeah,
uh,
so so I still don't see myself as good as him. But the one thing I have accepted recently is I think he would get a big kick out of the idea that his son is actually making a living with words, with telling stories.
yeah. Some people might not realize that reading is more than just a personal hobby. It's also about inclusion, right? Why is accessible reading material so vital for creating a more inclusive world? Before we dive deeper, I'd love to invite you to join the Observeday newsletter. Every week, I send you highlights of upcoming observances, creative ways to celebrate, and behind the scenes extras from the shows. It's the perfect way to stay inspired and never miss a meaningful moment. Sign up today at observeday.com/join. That is observeday.com/join. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
Right. Well, it is true. We learn not only about the world, but also how to communicate with people in our immediate surroundings through language. And one of the ways we learn language is through writing or through reading. And so it's very important, which is why there's been a renaissance of Braille instruction at early ages in the school systems in the US, Canada, and a lot of other countries, because they realize that reading isn't just about being entertained. Reading is also part of learning language. And if you don't learn language at an early age, it makes it really hard for you to compete with your fellow students or
Yeah,
people in the work world. So, access to books and other reading materials, including magazines, textbooks, even comic books, you know, is really important. And of course, beyond language, beyond learning about the world, the other thing those those options apply to is quite often that's how you communicate with your friends.
Yeah.
People in a certain, people in the same grade in school are reading the same books or a lot of the same books. So being able to have a conversation about the latest book or magazine is important to socialization. So there's yet another reason why accessibility in books and reading materials is important. And by making sure that people with vision loss or people with dyslexia and other reading disabilities are included is it affects the future of their contributions to our society. So
Yeah.
it goes far beyond just being able to enjoy a good story on a rainy afternoon because there ain't nothing to
Yeah.
do. And of course, we really need to work on the process of publishing, whether that's traditional publishing, self-publishing, vanity publishing. I'm not a fan of vanity publishing, but I understand it works for some people. We
Yeah.
really need to work on improving the process of writing and publishing because the world is missing out on a lot of great voices because the process of getting their work out into the world is a pain in the butt,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. And
Yeah, a lot of persons once they hear accessibility, right? You're like, oh, it's this checklist. Yeah, it's a compliance box. Yeah, we're accessible, right? Right? How do we shift the conversation so that authors, publishers, and businesses see accessibility not as a compliance box, but as an opportunity?
right. Well, one thing is that because of just how competitive the publishing world is,
Yeah,
implementing accessibility on your website, on your shopping cart, on your book submissions is a way you can stand out to the person with a disability, but also to the people who care about people with disabilities. It's also a way to get the attention of the search engines and of the AI bots.
yeah,
I recently interviewed a gentleman who's an expert on AI, and he was saying um, that the search engines and the AI crawlers, the only way they know what your website is about and why the internet should care about your website is you have to tell them. And
yeah,
one of the best ways for you to tell them is by making your stuff accessible, by using headings, having simple designs, having minimalistic amounts of items on pages, having the alternative text for images, making
yeah,
sure that buttons actually work, that shopping carts are actually tested for accessibility. So those are the kind of things that can really give you an advantage over all those other thousands or millions of people's books out there. Another thing that's kind of simple is when you're creating your cover art, think about the fact that whoever is viewing that, they may be using a magnifier that may be blowing that image up to 8, 10, 12, or even 14 times its normal size.
yeah,
So, is your book cover art the kind of thing that will translate well to being expanded and viewed in a larger size? Are your font choices simple and clear so they won't blur? Are your color choices high contrast options so that they make it easy for people who have some vision loss but are still using a magnifier or a screen magnifier? So, these are some really simple things that most anybody can appreciate and do for themselves without having to have anybody special teach them. And, most authors, I feel like, have an advantage because most of them, the only reason for their website or their blog is their books. And
yeah,
since they're focused on that most important solo thing, you don't usually run into a lot of, bloated websites or blogs from authors. As they get more famous or more successful and they start adding courses and speaking and retreats and all that other good junk, then yeah, sometimes they'll start to do that. But most authors, their website's all about their books. You know,
yeah, yeah. Oh. One of the key things you talk about is interdependence, right? This is not just a game for what's the word? It's not a responsibility for just one person. We all have a part to play in making materials, in this context, books accessible for an aspiring author, a current author listening right now. What simple steps can they take to make sure their book, whether digital or physical, can reach more readers, and also including those with disabilities?
right? So I would say make sure that your book has been created properly so that it can be easily navigated on any of the electronic devices, whether somebody's using a laptop, a desktop, a cell phone, or a tablet, or in some cases they're not even using a computer. They're listening to their book by telling Amazon to play it for them.
Yeah.
So making sure that things are properly formatted so they don't require extra effort by somebody with a disability to begin the book or to pause the book or to pick the book up later. Again, using clear, simple fonts, high contrast colors, uh, both very important. And those are not only good for people with some vision loss, they're also great for people navigating your website using mobile devices
Yeah.
because the smaller screens mean that the higher contrast helps them have higher comprehension.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things. Making sure your website is accessible. And you're right. I do talk about interdependence, and I talk about collaboration. And so part of that is me coming on your podcast and other podcasts and telling the authors the simple things they can do to
Yeah.
improve access. And part of that is being willing to have them ask me questions beyond what I talk about. So I'm always happy to hear from somebody who's sincerely interested in improving accessibility on their website or their blog. I would say one other thing as an author is our websites are not the end of our online presences. We also have our social media accounts, and many of us have email newsletters. So
Yeah.
we want to make sure that those things are accessible as well. Quite often, people forget about adding the alternative text when they make their social media posts or describing an image that's attached to a video that they upload. So I would say, if I could cause people to think and be a little more conscious of how something might benefit somebody like me, but also how it benefit them by, making the search engines like them or appealing to those people who have somebody with a disability in their lives who
Yeah.
they like to support companies and organizations that are making that effort. So those are some of the things I would talk about. And, when it comes to your book or when it comes to how you market your book, visit the website where your book is being made available. See if they aren't causing your potential purchasers problems. I mean, I personally, I have to watch myself because I am generally so frustrated by Amazon, both on the front and the back end, that I have to watch what I say about them. But let's just say I'm surprised on the back end that they haven't been sued in the United States yet. It's just difficult to find information on your sales, your clicks, any of that stuff if you're using adaptive technology. And then on the front end, you go to Amazon sites, their pages, even if you click a direct link from a book from an author,
Yeah.
there's just so much information on that page. So one other thing I advise authors to do, and I tell them to do this for two reasons, is make sure I can buy your books directly from your website. And
Yeah.
I say that for two reasons. One, you have the control over your website. You can make sure it's more accessible. But the other reason, and this is a selfish reason, but hey, we're authors. If we don't address our ability to sustain ourselves, we can't continue to write and educate, encourage, inspire others. Amazon is taking a larger and larger bite out of the
Yeah.
gross every year. And so by selling a book directly from your website, you can then keep a much higher percentage of the income. I don't know, I can't speak to what most people use, but when I do it, I'm looking at paying PayPal and they get like 6%. And
Yeah.
6% is a lot better than
Yeah.
40%.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
So
Anytime, any day. Yeah.
yes,
Oh,
anytime, and even with the fact that there are some countries where they can't really, where using PayPal is difficult, it still gives you the opportunity. I would say the same thing with audiobooks. Make sure your audiobook is available on your website directly. And if you think about it, well, you get trouble with Amazon if you offer people a discount. But if you think about it, you can sell a book cheaper on your own website than you can sell it on Amazon because you're going to keep a
yeah.
higher percentage of the gross. So those are, and then, one thing I really love when authors do this, I haven't seen many of them do it yet, but I've heard a lot of them talk about it, is when they take their book and they serialize it. they read it themselves or they have somebody read the audio,
Yeah.
and then you listen to a chapter at a time like a podcast, but it's a serialization of their book, or they take their book and they do a radio drama. Now I love
Yeah.
radio dramas. I grew up with old time radio. It was basically the equivalent of television reruns because old time radio went off the air in 1960, and I wasn't born until 66, but I grew up with it from local radio stations replaying it on the AM band. And I love radio dramas, and radio dramas are the probably the most accessible form of entertainment there is, because the writer has to invest the descriptions with dialogue, with sound effects, with people using their voices as instruments rather than just reading lines out of a book. So I really love old time radio. I also really appreciate the graphic audio. Have you ever read any of the graphic audio?
Yeah, this is the first time I'm hearing graphic and audio together.
Okay, I don't know their website. It's probably just graphicaudio.com. I'm not sure of it, but what they do is they take these larger graphic novels and they recruit a cast of sometimes as many as 40 voices, and they will do a just incredibly high quality audio drama of the graphic novel.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like virtual reality, but without the video. I mean, it is just amazing the quality, because back in old time radio days, there might be 5 or 6 voices to do a show,
Yeah.
but on average, there's probably 20 voices, and sometimes much more than that. And they're all voice talent. They're not people that grabbed off the street. They're people that do it for a living. So
Yeah, professionals.
it's a very high quality stuff. And I've listened to some of the Guardians of the Galaxy, listened to some of the Batman. I listened to one of the Daredevil graphic novels that way, and it's really good. But these are things people who are authors can do that bring in more people, that can widen the audience, but also make
Yeah.
their content more accessible.
Yeah.
Reading the audio, because it's expensive to hire somebody to read an audiobook,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
it's very time consuming and very tedious. There's a lot of feelings of drudgery in reading your own book from beginning to end.
Yeah.
But reading your own book a chapter at a time on a weekly basis, that's something more people can do, and
Yeah.
it's another way they can keep the money, because if they use one of most of the major podcast players will let them serialize something behind a paywall, and they can get a
Yeah.
buck or two a week from anybody that
Yeah.
wants to listen. So I mean, so sometimes improving access also improves income, or also has other
Yeah.
effects on the industry or society. But I really do wish we had a more accessible publishing industry. I really wish that Amazon and some of these other websites were more accessible than they are. They make an effort, but the problem that I run into with websites is what's called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. That's the international standard for what's
Yeah.
considered accessible. Well, you see, there are two really important things that aren't considered part of that standard that, in my opinion, should be.
Okay.
One is simple design. The other is minimalist design.
Yeah.
To me, if you want to make, because if I'm using adaptive technology, I'm using a screen reader, I got a mechanical switch device because my arms don't work right, it takes me longer to review the information that's on a website. So the more people will, look at their website and go, does this stuff really need to be on this page? Does this image really need to be here? I tell people all the time, if you get tired of describing images, then figure out if some of those images don't need to be on your website,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but simple design, because every time you add something fancy to a website, there's a chance it could cause problems for people with disabilities trying to navigate your website. Minimal, because the fewer items there are, the quicker I can get through them to find out, does this person have what I would like? Do they have what I need? And then progress to a purchase. But those two things are not in the standards we're using to evaluate websites.
Yeah.
Of
Oh.
course, they'd be really hard to quantify, but there should be some sort of a mention of it, in my opinion.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Max. One of your motto, and is even the name of your podcast, What's Your Excuse? And how has that mindset shaped the way you approach reading, writing, and sharing your story.
Okay. Well, I have two podcasts. The one I've had the longest is What's Your Excuse? I just recorded
Yeah.
a new episode last week with Terry Brown, who is the author of 10 Little Rules to a Double-Butted Adventure. And I've been actually using some of her rules in my life because they were so good, especially the one about don't quit on a bad day. If y'all haven't
Yeah.
listened to that podcast, go over to theblindblogger.net, listen to it because that was a heck of a podcast. What's Your Excuse is about not only overcoming excuses, but deciding whether or not something is an excuse. So I wrote my first book, Leading You Out of the Darkness into the Light, on a dare. A woman invited me to be part of an online summit. She said I needed to have a book to participate or something else to give away free. She sent me a guide on how to write a book and said I should be able to do it no problem in 30 days. And I said, sure.
Wow.
I said, okay, that may be the way you look at it. That ain't the way I look at it. I said, if this all goes wrong, I'll be sure to tell everybody whose fault this was. So I start working on the book, and I'm writing away. I'm very happy because I'm rediscovering my love for writing that they beat out of you in school.
Yeah.
They
It's
take
really
all the
beat out.
they take all the fun out of writing in school. I'm right. I'm right.
Yeah.
So I'm rediscovering my love for writing, and she gets back to me. She goes, Max, there's 4 other women in this summit. They've decided it would be better for marketing purposes if it was all women. And I said, okay, that's cool. I'm son of carnival people. I understand the importance of promotion and the idea of wanting more feet on the ground or butts in the seats or faces behind the screens. I said, but I'm going to keep writing the book. So I kept writing the book, not knowing how, if, or when I would publish it, just, wanting to finish telling the story. And when I finished it, I actually had a problem because I didn't think the book was long enough. I didn't think it was important enough. And I kept trying to think of what can I add to this book? But I shared it with a couple of friends privately, and one of them said, Max, this is a perfect self-help book. And I said, why is that? She said, because I printed it out, and even the whole thing printed out, I can slide it into the side of my purse or my briefcase and look back at it whenever I need to. She said it's very unintimidating. It's the kind of book that you want because you can take it with you. And she basically dared me. She said, Max, I know that you've been working with Lorraine on your website. If you don't send this to her and start getting it onto the internet, I'm going to send it to her for you. So I could nod at that point. One of the things about being known for no excuses and what's your excuses, people often will use that against me. As I've gotten older, I've gotten better at just saying, look, you can call me a chicken all you want to. I ain't going to do it. But we worked together, and she helped me get the book edited and formatted and published. And the only real problem we had is the cover art we used for it in the beginning. The artist ghosted us, and so we couldn't get permission to use the image. We had to start over on the images. So I had to pay 2 different artists for the cover art. But the book turned out really well. It's called Leading You Out of the Darkness into the Light: A Blind Man's Guide to Business Success, and it has 10 or 12 exercises in it, along with the examples of how I have followed my own advice in my own life. So, kind of give them an idea of how I answered the questions, so maybe they won't feel so stressful. And I also included my email address so they could tell me about their progress if they wanted to. Sadly, only like 5 people in 11 years since that book came out have ever written me. Yeah, I know. And when I first did that, I had authors and coaches telling me basically I'd lost my dang mind because people were certainly going to abuse my time and try to get coaching for free. And I'm like, oh, no, that never happened. I don't know why that never happened. But, you know how people are. There are people who really want to improve themselves, and then there are people who want to talk about improving themselves. So I feel like my book must have went to a lot of people who enjoyed having the book on their shelf. And then, of course, as a podcaster, you know this too. A lot of times people will be affected by our words, but we'll never hear from them.
Yeah, exactly. That was what I was about to say, but I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of persons, they read the book. Sometimes they read 1, 2, 3 chapters, and that changes their life. And probably that's all they need, right?
Yeah.
And still circling back to the idea of message. A lot of people, they anchor to the idea that, oh, I'm an author, I write books. And I'm like, no, It's not books you write. You have a message to share and you're using books to do that. And so going back to accessibility, if it involves making an audiobook, doing a podcast as you suggested, like a chapter by chapter serialized, or doing a radio show, whatever it is, to get the message across out there in the world, then we'll do it because the message is more important than the book itself.
You're so right. And that's kind of like what I've said over the years, which is we can decide to find solutions, or we can decide to make excuses, which is where the whole no excuses thing came from. And just like we can decide to find the positive in life, we can decide to ask for help or accept help. And as an author or creator of any kind, we get to decide what success looks like and whether or not we consider ourselves successful. However,
Yeah.
most people get stuck and hung up because they're using other people's definition of success. But but when it comes to creative things, you really have to be careful whose measure of success you're using, because you can be doing really good and still be miserable because you're using somebody else's definition of success. So
Yeah.
and that definition can change, but we get to choose these things. Many years ago, I read a book by Louise Hay. Don't ask me the title because I don't remember the title. I don't remember most of the book, but I remember this one line. I remember this one line, and I try to live by it. Whenever I'm stuck, things aren't going the way I want them to, and I'm like, what do I do next? Is I think about Louise Hay. She said that should and should not are two of the most dangerous expressions in the English language.
Yeah.
And so I try to remember those and try to ask myself, Max, is doing this the way other people want to do it serving you? If you try to do it the way they're doing it, will you be successful? Or, is there some other way Max could do this? And, my podcast is a great example of that, because from the very beginning, I knew that I did not want to edit. I'm not good at it. The technology isn't good. I know that if I tried to edit my podcast, I would never release anything.
Yeah.
And so from the beginning, I just leaned into it. I said, look, y'all, I'm a blind guy creating a podcast by myself. So I'm just not going to edit. We're going to put this out recorded live. And if y'all like it, fine. If you don't like it, fine. But that's the way it's going to get out into the world, is by not worrying about the editing and trying to improve it beyond just having a really good conversation like me and you are doing right now. And that's worked for me. And I feel like that works for a lot of people. But we've got so many voices out there saying, you have to edit, you have to crop clips out, you have to, you have to have intros and outros and transitions and all. And I'm like, no, all I have to do is have a conversation where I help my guests tell their story. That's all I need. That's all anybody else really needs,
And what you just saying is just reminding me of a quote I saw recently. That is, most people don't understand that the messenger is more important than the message. Now, it's strange, but the fact that you a blind guy that has a podcast and is doing a podcast despite all the technology accessibility issues, right? That fact alone, it gives depth to the message you have to share. And so even if any regular guy just wants to have a conversation, say, yeah, right? I mean, they could, but it's just different. And that's what a lot of persons they miss today. They don't the content they put out there is just, it's Me Too content. There is no volume of depth of their own story that makes them, oh, this is the messenger sharing this message, and so this is why they should care.
I couldn't agree with you more. I have given talks and written articles that basically say they won't buy your books if they don't buy your story. So, and it's that way as a podcaster. If people believe in you, if they come to like your story and want to see what you do with it next, then they'll look past the technical stuff. They'll look past the mistakes. They'll look past the errors and ahs and ums to pay attention to the content. And so it's a good storyteller or a good person who has a good story, a good origin story, backstory, whatever you want to call it. And then somebody who is able to help his guests or his panel tell their stories. And I really, and what's funny is last year I was invited to become a host for a podcast for a company called AudioEye that's big in the area of accessibility. And we had a tech guy. They bought me new gear. We had somebody to create the questions. We had
Yeah.
lots of really cool stuff where all I had to do was show up and talk to
Yeah.
people for about 20 minutes, and
Yeah.
nobody listened.
Ooh.
Yeah. So they canceled the podcast, and they said, Max, we feel like people are used to you being a different kind of host. We don't believe that they feel compelled to connect with you in this particular style and format. And I said, okay, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But here's the funny thing. After they canceled the podcast, I reached out to the tech guy. I said, look, I'm going to be by myself. I would really love it if we could have a meeting and go over the tech every so often. He's like, yeah, Max, we can do that. He said, but I think that what we learned from working with you is you have to ignore the tech and just focus on the story. Just tell you.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you're the tech guy. You're the guy who had to pay for all this stuff. You're the guy who used to help me get wired up and synced. And I'm like, and your advice is don't worry about the tech, just worry about Max and the story. And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a
Wow.
great reminder from a tech guy, the kind of person who probably, sleeps Wired magazine articles, and he's telling
Yeah.
me just to ignore the tech junk and focus on the story and the conversations, which is what I've been doing. So, okay. I would like to just make one last comment, which is not
Okay.
really on accessibility, but it does have to do with storytelling. I would say if you're working on a novel, a short story, whatever, and you want to include characters that have a disability of any kind,
Okay.
then please reach out to somebody or several somebodies who have that disability and ask them if your impressions of how those people live their lives is true or
Yeah.
not. I mean, yeah, there's going to be a spectrum because there's wide differences between.
That's where we wrap today's conversation with Maxwell Ivey, better known as the blind blogger. If you'd like to continue learning from Max, exploring his work, or even reaching out to collaborate, head over to his website, theaccessibilityadvantage.com. You'll find his latest content, resources, and ways to connect with him directly. Also, I'll add the link in the description and the show notes so you can click and go directly to the site. That's it for today's episode of the Observeday podcast. Thank you for spending your time with us as we explore today's observance. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share it with a friend who'd love to celebrate life special days too. Don't forget to join the newsletter at observeday.com/join for more observance stories, tips, and updates. Until next time, keep finding meaning in every day.